Welcome to Vision Chats at Johns Hopkins University, where the only thing that matters in the next hour is the future. I'm so excited to be with you today to talk about the future with three colleagues who I think are just risk takers, audacious movers, who are thinking about the future all the time in their own work. Adrienne Alberts is an HR and recruiting professional and leader from GDIT. Frida Polli, who is co-founder and CEO of Pymetrics, a great company that you should look into that is looking at using artificial intelligence to eliminate bias in the hiring process. And Adam Saven, who is the co-founder and CEO of PeopleGrove, also another company that is looking at making access to mentors and to connections open and to all, regardless of social capital or and background. Listen, this Vision Chat today, I am really excited about it. I've been thinking a lot for the last few weeks about how we're going to set this up. And I want to first start by just naming the obvious. It's been 17 days since George Floyd was brutally murdered in the hands of law enforcement on May 25th. And this has happened in the middle of a global pandemic, 207 days since the first reported case of COVID-19 in the world, 142 days since the first reported case of COVID-19 in the US. We've had 7.4 million cases and close to 400,000 deaths worldwide, and close to 2 million cases and over 113,000 deaths in the United States. All of this is not just happening just randomly. I believe personally that COVID-19 has acted as an accelerant to trends that we have known were coming for a long time. Listen, automation, we knew was coming for a long time, and now COVID-19 is accelerating that. Social justice has been a movement that's been going on for a long time. Certainly Black Lives Matter. This is not the first year it started. It's been around for at least 7 years. And I believe that there are other trends and things that we have that have been around us that I believe will be accelerated by COVID-19, like the Me Too movement, where we're just a spark away from that being reignited again. Climate change issues. There are just so many trends that are around us that I believe are converging at the same time. And all of this is having an impact on us as a society. And it is having an impact on the workplace in general and how we recruit, how we retain people. So my first conversation piece, my first question to my dear colleagues here is, how is the workplace changing to meet the new standards of 2020 and beyond, of the next decade and beyond?
So if you don't mind, Farouk, I'll jump in there. So hello, everybody out there. It's Adie, for those of you who've known me for a long time. I first just want to say, I want to give a disclaimer for the conversation so that I can feel free to really have a chat with everybody, that today I'm not speaking for GDIT. I'm literally speaking for myself. Just as me, my experiences, and what I am seeing, because I'm not exactly sure where this conversation will go or how I'll feel. And I just want to have an opportunity for us to really be honest, because I think that's most helpful for our conversation and everybody else. So thanks for letting me share the disclaimer. But I could not agree with you more, Farouk, about the COVID acceleration of so many things. Like, we saw ourselves overnight have to switch our thinking about who we are and how we respond, and we keep having to do it. So we started with just this notion that we're going to be at home. I work in an environment where part of the work we do requires people to be in a space. And so we had to overnight decide we're not going to be in those spaces together anymore. We're going to work from home. And so we had to switch all of our thinking about our internship programs and the students who were going to be joining us in a way that would allow us to greet them quickly. And now we've seen all of the injustice that's happening. There's been a real flashpoint to that. Also, don't think that's by accident. And we've had to think about who we are as an organization related to that in an environment where I think this generation is going to require us, and God bless them, I'm so happy that they are audacious enough to require us to stand up and be accountable, right? They're not going to take, I'm not going to say anything as appropriate, right? They're going to push us to be and say something. And so it's just been really interesting to see all of those things happen so quickly. I don't think we're ever going to get to go back to not being able to be that agile and nimble again. We've proven that we know how to move, and we may be making tons of mistakes along the way, but I don't think we're ever going to see a time where we get permission again to say we can't move as quickly as the opportunity requires us to move. So yeah, like I'm just curious when I think about that nimble and moving quickly and how we are connecting people, Adam, I really think about, you know, that this notion of how are people getting through this? Like, how are people figuring it out? I think about our interns all the time and what they're not learning by being in a physical space where they can see the dynamics. And that this notion of mentorship in this kind of time could be really important. I'm just curious about what you're seeing and how you guys are thinking it through.
Yeah, certainly. And in many ways, what we're seeing is COVID is both kind of shining greater light on injustices and iniquities that already existed. But in other respects, it's also opening the door to innovation that levels the playing field. So when I think about mentorship and access to mentors, in-person interactions, obviously they can't be replaced, 100%. But a kind of new paradigm where we hop on a Zoom and I can talk to any professional anywhere in the world, it changes the game for who might be accessible to me as a student. We also assume that meeting a stranger, potentially a new mentor in person, is a comfortable dynamic. It's not, it's scary. Virtual mentorship also gives people a chance. Thinking beyond mentorship as well, something that we've been kind of interested in is also the admissions process. So as an example, it used to be that if you were admitted to a school, in order to assess your fit, if you were lucky, you would buy a plane ticket, you would get a hotel accommodation. We're talking hundreds of dollars, a massive investment just to see your fit on campus. And it kind of further revealed those who could afford it and those who couldn't. Now, schools are having to reevaluate what it means to mentor incoming students. How do they make their staff, others in their community available? So it's complex. There's a lot of differing trends, but on the whole, I think it's challenging higher education that does not historically have a startup ethos to revisit policies and practices that weren't very, very fair and just to begin with.
Yeah. And if I can just, add to that, I think, so again, Pymetrics uses behavioral science and artificial intelligence to make workforce decisions more accurate and more fair. And, I would completely echo what Adam said. I think that, we are seeing an acceleration to greater use of technology, and, things of that nature. And so therefore, I think and in the context of a great, strong desire for more racial equity and equity of all kinds, but in particular racial equity at this point, right? So I think that it's really a time not to question how nimble we can be in many ways, and some of the ways that we see this being super important. We were just talking about this before we got on, Adrienne, was the fact that we actually are one of the, we're not a big tech company, we're a little tech, as I like to say, but we are advocating for more safeguards to be put in place when people are using automated system of any kind, right? Because it has, again, automated systems can basically mirror the intention of the organization. So if the intention of the organization is really to foster diversity, bring in more people, but there is technology that can help you do that, and it's there, and we're part of that stack. If the intention of the organization is to basically perpetuate, status quo practices, which are not friendly at all to, applicants of color. I mean, the resume, unfortunately, continues to perpetuate systemic bias and discrimination, and so on and so forth, that those types of technologies developed and used by those companies will simply, go down that path. And so we really believe strongly, and we're actually behind some legislation in New York and in California that's asking legislators who are certainly not used to being nimble to consider putting some guardrails in place so that there is more transparency and accountability to vendors that are providing these types of automated services in workforce decisioning, particularly in hiring, to say, what are your algorithms doing? Because right now it's a black box, nobody knows, and it's extremely hard for someone going through any of these automated systems to know what the impact is on things like gender and race. So again, I think that it's, and quite frankly, because of everything that's going on in the world, we see huge support for this type of initiative, right? Whereas I think historically we might have seen maybe less support. And I think it's really calling into question just all practices and where we need to be, to your point, Adrienne, nimble and really ensure that the processes we're putting in place now, especially if we're going to be more reliant on technology and automation, are fair. Because historically, I would say that if they're just going to mirror the status quo, they will continue to be unfair and discriminatory. So,
and I keep seeing we are always looking for ways to make processes more seamless, right? And to be able to automate things so that we can use our human capital to do things that really require our human capital to lean in. Yep. But I've been saying for years, my fear about AI and automated, machine learning is that it's just going to learn our poor behavior. Yep. If we have poor behavior going in, it's just going to learn that. And this notion of tying all of this work that you are doing and that I am so eager to learn more about with the other things that have to go around it, right? Our practices still have to enable us to make sure that people have training about unconscious bias, because we all have it. We just have to recognize it. And then we have to be brave enough to be willing to do the work to work through it. But we have to do that work, right? We have to marry that with the guardrails in the system that will keep us from perpetuating. But I hope our systems we don't want to perpetuate, or that just shining a light on the environments where we're frankly pretty okay to keep it the way it is.
Yeah, and I think that it's important. So again, my background is I was a cognitive scientist for 10 years. And I think that we have to differentiate two types of thinking processes in the human brain. So there was a book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. The types of processes that are amenable to change are the slow processes. I meet Adrienne, I meet Adam, I have this thoughtful, methodical, taking in information. Unfortunately, there's also the fast thinking process, and it is extremely able to be coerced by bias. It just is a thing that we've known for a long time. And it's because it's the rapid automatic decision-making process. That system learns from an environment, right? If the system, and it's the brain, right? This fast thinking system in the brain learns that, right now in society, there are many more women that are teachers and nurses than there are CEOs and entrepreneurs, it's going to have that automatic association, right? And unfortunately, unconscious bias training does not fix that, right? So what we need to do is put guardrails in place, and technology can act as one of those guardrails if it is designed properly to do exactly that, right? So that we are not relying on these, because that's what happens with resume review, right? So we were talking about callback studies where, John gets, 50% more callbacks than Jamal, put with the exact same credentials, literally the exact same credentials. All you do is change the name. That's because this automatic system is hijacked to think of Jamal a certain way because of all the environments we're raised in, and John another way, right? Or it could be Mary and John. It's the same outcome, right? So that's where we need to put guardrails in terms of process and anti-bias technology in place, and those two things do exist, and they're the things that have been shown to be the most effective. And then I completely agree, it's not an excuse. It's not to say, oh, and that's our work is done, we're good, No, then we have to dig in to the thought, the slow thinking system and say, okay, people, now what else needs to happen? Because there's a lot of other stuff that needs to happen. Does that make sense? But I think that's a little bit where we've been failing historically, is not addressing that automatic decision-making and thinking that, again, unconscious bias training is not going to help that. And the data are pretty clear on that. And we need other guardrails in place. So.
Well, for me as perhaps a potential Pymetrics customer, it's encouraging to know that your leadership, your team, all these themes are part of your DNA. You didn't launch Pymetrics just to make things happen or be more efficient. It was to solve this one problem. So it's the core of what you do, which, Adrienne, thinking back to one of the comments you made about bottoms up accountability. I think one thing that COVID has also accelerated is bottoms up accountability. When individuals can work from anywhere, they don't have the distractions of concerts, basketball games, all these other things. they're thinking deeply about topics. And I feel challenged, right? I'll acknowledge I'm a young leader with a lot to learn. But I'm grateful to have people on my team who hold me accountable. And if I'm not doing a good job, our leadership team isn't doing a good job, they'll find another place to work. They won't even have to move, right? In a work from anywhere culture. So yeah, I think that's one thing that I've seen rapidly change is kind of this dynamic of leaders call the shots and staff just does the work. That's not the case anymore, not at all. So I think that is definitely something that, at least for me, I felt like COVID has accelerated in our workforce, more individuals having a voice in really important conversations.
Farouk, I'm curious. I was just going to ask you, I'm curious about how you're seeing that on campus, because I've been talking to some friends in higher ed about kind of the students driving us to think differently. And like, that's going to impact the higher ed environment too. I'm just curious what you are starting to see there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because the students have been part of the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, for years now. And I remember in campuses that they're seeing the marches and the protests against, for example, racism in lectures and in faculty behavior. So it's not new to them. They've been part of that movement. They've been pushing it. They've been challenging us. And what's really interesting and I think encouraging now is that I'm finally seeing the language change, so that and also some actions change, so that we're talking about what the problem really is. So even the language now towards anti-racism versus just inclusion, or versus equity, or versus even anti-bias, like we're actually really talking about anti-racist behavior. It reminds me of one of the books that have had the greatest impact on me in this area, and it's Beverly Tatum's Why Do All Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria, where she puts it out there that we're all breathing the same smog of racism. So it's in us. It's it's in our lungs. It's in our DNA already. No matter who we are and where we are, we're all breathing the same prejudice smog. And what I am seeing now as a result of this reignition of Black Lives Matter, that was due to the horrific loss of a human being in the middle of a global pandemic, is all of a sudden some of the elements of this acceptance to that smog, or just awareness, is actually becoming more mainstream. One of the examples of this is that people are kneeling now. It was just less than a year ago that this was a big debate. Should we kneel or should we not? Is this is this like not being patriotic, but now you're actually seeing it. That's one. Two, you're seeing conversations about race happening not only in public, but also in corporate settings, in the workplace. And people are feeling free to do that, and it is more accepted and acceptable. Are we all out there? No, not yet, but I think it's a lot more comfortable, if you will, to have these conversations at work and to feel free to speak, even with our own titles, and challenge the status quo. I'm part of a committee that's looking at hiring and recruiting, etc. And I felt absolutely empowered to say, because we were talking about how do we ensure that we're hiring more, or that we have more diversity in our recruits. And I felt comfortable to say that this is not just about identifying talent only. So it's not about marketing and getting Black people to apply. I need us to change our system so that those Black people and brown people get through the system and actually make it to the final interviews and actually get hired, because it does me no good if you get me a huge percentage of Black and brown applicants, and then at the end of the day, you're still going to hire the white person. That just doesn't calculate. So that means that we have to challenge our own anti-racist, our own racist assumptions and behaviors and thoughts that eliminate a lot of candidates, and justly, and we're not even conscious about those. So we are at a moment when we have to move beyond statements and posts on LinkedIn and on Twitter It's beautiful that these companies are putting out these messages, but we are a moment now where we need to start putting practice and putting policies in place and actually take action to truly dismantle the structures of racism and biases in our society. And I think it's starting to happen in higher education. It's starting to happen in industry. We have a lot of work to do ahead of us. And I think students are pushing back. They're saying, one of the cool things about COVID-19, if there is such a thing, is that students are now, they have power. They're holding universities accountable. Before COVID-19, it felt like it was the university that had the power. It's like, well, you have to come to my campus anyways. You have to get this degree. But all of a sudden now students are saying, I don't have to go to that school. If I'm gonna just be on Zoom University, I'm just gonna go pay for the cheaper one, So you have admission departments that are stressed out about enrollment. They're digging deep into their waiting lists, and there are some that don't have waiting lists to dig deep into. So all of a sudden now universities know that, just like companies, that if you want to recruit and retain people, whether they're students or customers or hires, you now have no choice but to change your rhetoric, your policies, and act on it and hold yourself accountable. And one of the greatest examples that I'll finish with is the NFL. There's a reason why now they're coming up with a statement saying it's okay to kneel, because they know that those players are going to walk now. They're going to just say, you know what, I'm done with you. But while in the past they didn't. The power dynamics have shifted, and I think it's in the hands of the consumer, the client, the employee, the student, the player, and giant structures no longer can just push us around.
So I love that you said that. It's the dynamic that I have seen around me this past week, or past 2 weeks probably, has been, I've never seen this. Like, I literally have never seen this notion that the employee has the voice to speak. We always had it, right? I just don't know that we knew that we could use it. And I will speak personally for myself. I didn't always feel safe using it. But this notion, I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, and I started writing down like the evolution of like diversity, right? It started with affirmative action, and then we started talking, and it was compliance based, and then we started talking about diversity, and then we moved to inclusion. And the next sentence I wrote was anti-racist. Like, anti-racism is an evolution, I think, in how we think about this, and the empowerment for people to be able to speak their truth. I have had so many people ask me at work recently how I am doing, and I have felt very bold to tell them, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. This is not okay. And I am fighting with who I am and what my job is. I work in HR. I have a job that requires me to be supportive of the organization, but supportive around a topic that I am personally impacted by every single day. So I'm struggling all day, and I leave virtual work exhausted. But this notion that people aren't okay. And so I just offer to everybody who's out there as a part of this conversation with us, everybody's not okay. And it's not just people who look like me and who wear this skin that aren't okay. Probably most people aren't okay. And that actually is okay, right? It's okay for us not to know what to say, and for it to be messy, and for us to be worried that we're going to say something that is absolutely going to be offensive, and that we're going to stumble, and that we won't know what to say, so we're maybe scared to say anything. What I feel, again, Farouk, I was so mad at COVID because it had taken so much. And while I am still very angry about the notion of all the lives that are being lost, particularly because my community is so impacted by that, what I appreciate, much like you said, can you find something good in all of this mess? What I appreciate is it is breaking down our barriers and allowing us to be vulnerable with each other in a way that we weren't before. And maybe it's because I'm not sitting right next to you with the fear that I'm going to have to feel that palpable response, but that I am opening myself up to a level of vulnerability that is interesting. And I'll leave with this. This is something I think is really going to impact our students. And I've been talking to people about this vulnerability and how we're going to have to really deal with this. We're seeing into each other's homes, right? like when we're Zooming, like I have had conversations with vendors where I'm like, that's your made bed behind you, right? Like we are seeing so much more about each other in this environment where we are home, and our kids are coming and having conversations with us. I have several new team members, whether it's pet children or real children, who have joined our conversations. And so this level of vulnerability in this way is something that I also don't think is going away. People are gonna get used to this. So that voice and the vulnerability that we have now, I think is gonna start to color who we are. And for all of my university friends out there, get ready, because students are gonna be, like, they're gonna challenge us to live up to this moment.
Absolutely. And, you know, and there are students today, they're your employees tomorrow. So they're the same people, and the movements that are starting on our campuses today, they're bringing them to your workplace.
Exactly.
So we're all in it, and you know, we're all in it fighting the same fight. Adrienne, what you're saying is actually triggering a great response from our viewers. Allison Angel said that she honestly hopes that everyone is not okay. If people feel okay right now, that's a huge concern. Thank you, Adrienne. So I think people are connecting with what you're saying, and I agree. Like, I think it's not comfortable right now with all of what's going on, but it's the kind of good discomfort that is forcing us to deal with our disease, with our demons, with all of that is wrong in society, and we're pushing through, hopefully, to a brighter future.
I think for Adam, like I would love to work for a company like yours, where you're saying my employees are going to hold me accountable, and I got to step up. Like,
I mean, look, as a white leader at this company, I want to speak humbly on the topic of racial justice. There are many blind spots, and speaking candidly, I took 2 days off and just simply said, in school, they taught me more about Mesopotamia than they did Martin Luther King. Like, just being candid, growing up. And so, you know, it took a lot of time to, like, frankly, learn, listen, educate myself, reach out to peers. And something that I frankly have been very conscientious of is actions over words. That, like, as opposed to thinking about what's something awesome I could share on Twitter that I get a pat on the back and a retweet for, what's something that we as a company, we as employees can do that no one hears about? Like, truly just authentic things that are part of our culture, whether it's companies we decide not to work with or like shops we choose to support. But how do we do things that aren't just a one-off celebration, but are part of the culture at PeopleGrove and endures? And that's something that, you know, I've been thinking deeply on. So I'll be honest, it is like it can be an uncomfortable topic, right? Like I know that I need to be intentional. As a company, we need to be intentional. And sometimes being slow and intentional is better than just the fast tweet and looking for the pat on the back. There's an article that I'll paste here on the right. It's about performative allyship. And it's all about this topic of, like, what does it really mean to be a true ally? And that in many regards, it's the things that no one will ever see, no one will ever hear. And so hope that's the case here at PeopleGrove.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, because I think that, you know, our head of people, the day that George Floyd happened, basically sent out an email to the entire company, and we're only 150 people, basically saying, I want to just create some space for people to just come and be. And it was, you know, probably a third of the company that came, a quarter, something like 40 people. And it was, you know, including myself, people just crying. It was intense. I mean, it was insane. Like, and it was not just people of color. It was a lot of people, and everyone was, I mean, I'm like thinking, it's like stirring up, and it was just intense. And it was the furthest thing from a corporate, I mean, not that we're super corporate, but I mean, it was just the furthest thing from like a work experience. I felt like it was just, and that kind of set the tone for the next, 2 weeks basically. And it was very uncomfortable in many regards, and rightly so. And again, I'm white. So all I could keep thinking is like, it's whatever's happening for me is umpteen factors, orders of magnitude worse, for people of color. So, but I agree with you, like on every level, this whole idea of like, this is a perfect example. I had to come up with a CEO statement, right? And I was like, really, do I have to do, yes, of course. Do I have to say that Black Lives Matter? And people are like, oh, it's important for people to know. I was like, okay. I was like, don't people know that? But, and then it was like, what do I say? And I literally spent 3 days and I got so many people's opinions, and some people thought it was great. And, some people thought it was this. And at the end of the day, I ended up with a very short statement, and it basically said we need to take action, because all of this talk felt so just, when something so profound happens, like, what can you really say that's even begins to capture, I don't know. It's just, so I totally agree that, it's time for action. And I think that's really what I'm looking to, and time for action for everybody, including ourselves. I mean, the short thing I wrote was like, everyone has work to do. We all have work to do. And, we do have, people of color in leadership and everything, but there's more work that we need to do, and our work is not going to be done until we've substantially fixed, or
Right.
not fixed, but substantially addressed these problems, and we're all responsible. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think a lot of us in the leadership positions are or have been grappling with that. And we've seen CEOs and presidents of universities, et cetera. And I'll just say a couple of comments about this. Statements that have gone through the wash and the rinse and are completely sanitized and whatever to remove all risks, we see you. I see through it, and we all see through it. The statements that make an impact are the most authentic ones. And personally, as I was trying to do something, and for my own organization and people who work in my organization, but also students I serve, and the greater community that I'm a part of, for me, true allyship means that you're willing to put it on the line, meaning that you're willing to take risks with your business, possibly lose customers, possibly make some people in your organization angry, to have those conversations. I've worked in a workplace before where holding these types of conversations, as I do now courageously, I was told that you're making white people uncomfortable. I was told that, but they didn't say white people. They just said you're making a bit people feel guilty. So we want to try to not have too many of those conversations. I am fortunate to be at a workplace now that allows me fully to express myself that way. But what I would tell you is that the moment also is given a great license to it, because it's no longer socially acceptable to come to someone like me or others and just say you're making people feel guilty because of the moment. What has changed this time? George Floyd isn't the first Black man that died in the hands of the police. And unfortunately, I'm sad to say this, he won't be the last one. Mm-hmm. There will be more. This is not the first one who got caught or who was caught on camera being brutally murdered. I believe that what is different now, well, one, we talked about it, is COVID-19 has slowed us all down to pay attention. You said it beautifully, Adam, that we're not watching basketball games and The Bachelor and whatever and everything in between. We're not dealing with a lot of that. So, but I think too is how long it took. 8 minutes and 46 seconds of us witnessing somebody lose his life unjustly and so brutally at the hands of somebody who had zero empathy, I think just struck a chord in all of us that just says, this is not okay. But the truth is that Black and brown people have known that for a long time. This is 400 years of this country putting its knee on Black people's necks. And now it has just kind of come all to the forefront, and we're all realizing that. But we can't just stop at making the audacious statements, because frankly, now speaking about it is kind of like popular. I need you to actually take it further and say the statements that people struggle with, like defund the police. Actually take it a step further, like that. Then I'll know that you really mean it. The second thing I want to say is that holding open spaces so that we can all talk about it is something that I've done too, and others are doing. What I've learned from that is that is that not a lot of Black people will show up to those. And I don't know if you've experienced that. And I had a really good conversation with a Black person I admire a lot about this, who told me, you know, like, I don't want to go to that because I'll feel like, once again, I have to make the white person comfortable as they're dealing with all of this discomfort. I've been doing that all my life. I am not just going to come in and, you know, watch you cry and just really feel really bad about this. And then for me to have to make you feel better about it, or tap you on the shoulder for being such a great ally. Like, this is not my job. I am not going to do this. I'm dealing with this mess on my own. I've been dealing with it all my life. You feel uncomfortable? Good. Deal with that. And then once you figure out what needs to happen, we'll work through that. That was a really good lesson for me to learn, that, like, we need to open these spaces, but this is not a moment to try to gravitate towards creating harmony among ourselves. It is about us just really sitting in that discomfort and understand the great injustice that happens, and that we're not going to try to get through it in a week or two, because it took 400 years to get us to where we are. We need to really put our words into action and start dismantling all of the systems, the structures, the policies, and the people who continue to put the system's knee on Black and Brown's necks. And it's gonna continue. I mean, it is Black Lives Matter today, but there are just so many issues that are related. It is immigration, it is the Latinx community, it is LGBTQ. It's a lot of communities that have been just oppressed, and the workplace is the right place to do it. And the truth is that this generation of students that's graduating now, that's going to be in the workplace, we have to learn how do we connect them with opportunities in this new world through AI, et cetera, that in an unbiased way, but also create environments for them where they can freely speak up and challenge the companies and challenge the universities and challenge the system in order for us to reach that more just world. That's my thoughts. I don't know what you think about that, what your reactions to it.
Especially Frida, I saw you getting ready to start. You go, I'll follow you.
So, you know, I think this goes back to my earlier point. I think, unfortunately, one of the systems that are going to need to change are legal systems. And again, it's the least sexy, least interesting, most sort of like, oh my God, you know, case law, who wants to get into that? But right now, I think a lot of the things that are keeping, you know, sort of discriminatory systems and hiring in place, quite frankly, is, you know, employment law that was well-intentioned but crafted, you know, 50 years ago, unchanged, and a whole legal structure surrounding it that really, and again, we've been, you know, sort of dealing with this for a while, so we're quite familiar with it. But again, the anti-discrimination laws we have in this country have massive loopholes in them, massive. And until we start to address some of these things, we're not going to see true change. Because again, and I think, again, our perspective from having dealt with this for a while is we actually see companies wanting to institute better process, but unfortunately, the management side attorneys' job is to keep them safe. I mean, you must know all about this, Adrienne, yes. Right? And they will say, don't look at your input and output of different, you know, ethnic minorities, because we'd rather not know if it's biased than know and be accountable. And until we change that, we are fundamentally fucked, excuse my French, because, you know, we need to have a system where looking is promoted, and if you find something, then you should fix it. But if we don't promote looking and having transparent systems, which we do not, 100% do not, it's the total opposite. Everything has to be not discoverable and blah, blah, blah. We will never change this, right? And so, and again, there's examples that have been done, like in Massachusetts, the Equal Pay Act basically promoted just that. It said, look at your pay, you know, take a look, don't not look because you're worried you're gonna get sued. And if you find something, then fix it. And you will get that grace period. And I 100% think we need something like this now, because our anti-discrimination laws right now in this country have loopholes you could drive UPS trucks through. And they are, I mean, there are many, many hiring processes right now that are not subject to great legal scrutiny as a result of it. And I feel very strongly about this. So it's the least sexy thing you could possibly ever get into. And but it is absolutely critical. And I think we need to start raising, you know, some of these things to the forefront. So
I'll add, so somebody in the,
Please go ahead.
Go ahead. Somebody in the chat asked, like, how do we dismantle career services? in their interaction with employers who are only looking for top students, right? It's the similar, right? Like we have to figure out how we get rid of these antiquated processes. And so my thought would be, in this environment of having the opportunity to be bold and challenge your institution to find other ways to evaluate efficacy in learning that don't tie somebody to a GPA, right? Because we know that it's not predictive of long-term success, and challenge us to find ways to find the top students that don't tie to that very antiquated evaluation of somebody's capability and their ability to perform in a role. Like they just are not correlated at all. They have no long-term predictability, but we continue to use it both to define and evaluate someone on a campus and to define if they can get into a campus, frankly. And then we then keep that as the monitor that we use about whether or not somebody is a top student. It's also about the access they have to be involved or engaged in things on campus. And you know what, frankly, if you're paying for your education, you don't have an opportunity to be the student leader in every single club. So we have got to really challenge ourselves to think differently. And we have to be bold enough to say that and to mean that. And I will, Farouk, I would not sleep with myself to be able to look at myself in the mirror if I didn't address this notion of why Black people aren't showing up to those conversations. Because I'm going to speak for me. I'm never going to speak for my community. I'm only going to speak for me. And this notion that I am struggling with something and that I have to help you figure out how to struggle with it is just infuriating. And I absolutely understand the natural inclination to ask the person who is aggrieved, how do we stop it, right? How do I help you, right? I understand the natural inclination to want to do that. But this is this is going to be a raw example, but I'm using it. You would never ask a woman who had been raped to talk to her rapist about how to not rape again. You wouldn't do it. You would feel it would be so offensive to re-injure her by putting her in an environment to have to figure that out. So if I'm right now in pain because I am seeing this and thinking of all the times that I have lived this, don't ask me to feel well enough about it to help you figure out how to stop doing it. And frankly, I can't give you all those answers, right? Because I've never been in the position of power to be able to make those decisions in the first place. I can tell you what the outcome is, but other people need to bring minds together to hire Frida, to engage Adam, right? To talk about tools that are working, right? That they have empirical evidence that they are making a difference, and use that to be the guide. Put your money where your mouth is and hire the consultants who are the experts, who can help us really think through how to make these changes. And then if you want to vet that with me to see if it feels okay, if it feels like it's going far enough, maybe I'm interested in having that conversation. But don't come to me to ask me to solve it initially, because that's really unfair. And it's frankly infuriating. And I know we all have a role to play, and we'll get to the point, right? I was thinking twice about I was like, are you going to show up tomorrow? Are you going to this conversation? Are you ready to talk about this? And I know it is my responsibility to my community to always show up if I can, because I need to be a part of us making a change. But I want to pick when I'm ready to do that, right? It's my choice. It's nobody else's choice. And so for everybody else, just be sensitive. If you're going to people and ask, if they give you the side eye or are not really expressive, they just may not have the emotional capacity in that moment to help. It is not because they are mad at you. It is not because they don't want change. It's because they are human and they are living in their own humanness. And we all should have every opportunity to live in that space for as long as we need to.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of snaps. You're blowing up the chat box right now. And the rape example just forces us to just know how raw that pain is. Thank you for that.
Adrienne, you mentioned this notion between career and employers and this level of accountability. Something that I was just thinking of was the power that employers across the country also have on driving change before people enter the workforce.
You're right.
You know, if GDIT, Google, or Accenture said, we're simply not going to recruit at your university if your university hasn't acted in XYZ ways. Like we do not believe your university is equitable today. We do not believe you're supporting all students. And we're simply not going to come there until you do. I know that is a bold thing to state, but right, like as I'm thinking about, Frida was mentioning the legal system. I think we'd all agree, like labor law is just one part of things that need to change. There's things that occur far before one ever gets a shot at entering the workforce that is fraught with iniquity. So I was just kind of sitting here thinking the domino effect, how you can, even from the beginning, from employers, push down the changes that we want to see earlier in the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to say vice versa to that too, is that I think we as universities should also put it on the line and say, you're not going to come and recruit our students. We're going to recruit them outside of our system, fine, more power to you. We're not going to help you because we see you. We know that your practices are not equitable, and we see you. Unless you make these changes, we're not going to facilitate that process. So I think as I said earlier, we need to move beyond statements and start putting it on the line and just hold people accountable. And I would even go further to say, don't look at just companies and universities and their statements and some of these practices. Look at who's leading those organizations and look at who is not visible in those leaderships, particularly board of directors. They have a lot of investors, and your board of trustees. And look at the membership of those people and find out their stances. You will find publicly what they stand for. And perhaps before we separated politics from it, but right now I'm afraid we're past that point. Find out what they support politically and what they're willing to stay silent about, because that would tell me personally if you are truly willing to put it on the line. Because if I divest, whether it's with my feet by saying I'm not going to work for your company, or I'm not going to pay you another dime in this license agreement, or I'm not going to let you hire my students, or I'm not going to recruit from you, because you have people who pull the strings in your company or your university who politically are silent about these things or support clear actions of racism and prejudice. Then then you're really not hold people accountable. Like, that's really take it that far. And I've seen board of trustees in many universities and board of directors in many companies. I see the membership, and some of them, it's frightening that they are there and they get a call, they get to make a decision about the future of those organizations.
Yeah.
Adam, I love the challenge to say, employers, you get to decide. Like, it's sad to me that it took you saying that for me to think, oh my God, I have immense power. I have immense power to do exactly that. And don't think we will not be talking about it this week in our team meeting. But you're so right, that we equally have a responsibility. And I've been thinking about this notion that we make an impact, and where we are trying to build deeper partnerships with universities that we are going to partner with, don't we have the ability to help form what their freshman classes look like, right? Don't we have the ability to partner with them at that point to say, right, how do you frame the people that you recruit, and how do we lean in before they even get to the university stage to support them and help them and nurture them to understand what the world and the workforce could look like, and that these are the partner schools that we're already recruiting for. Doesn't that make you look more attractive as an institution? If we can do that, we can also say we are not doing that. We are not going to engage in that way. And I can find a myriad of ways. Indeed, COVID's helped me with that too. A myriad of ways to go directly to students, right? To engage them without the confines of having to partner with anybody, right? To meet my goals. So it's not a fear of not being able to do what I need to do, but this notion of partnership is so important and intrinsic in how we've always done our work. But the power we have to say with our feet and our decisions that our partnerships matter, and we have to be more thoughtful about that. Like, that was such an aha for me.
I mean, taking that further, right? We mentioned, if you're a student paying for college, the notion that you could be doing a million different clubs, that's not realistic. So to what extent could GDIT and or other, large companies out there, be in the classroom, like be in a place where students are able to be part of the, and that's like a whole paradigm shift, right? Now we need to change the ways of professors to say learning has to be more practical, right? We need to give all students a shot to develop these skills. But having read a lot of like Professor Galloway's articles recently on kind of higher ed corporate partnerships, it seems like that's where we're heading. So I think for the companies that act first, it will frankly not also be a massive moral advantage. It will be a massive economic advantage. You'll get the best talent. People want to work with your company. People want to buy from you, all these things.
I mean, yeah. And I think at the end of the day, though, it's like, it really is about having greater transparency around all of these processes, right? Because if you look at the composition of corporate America, it is not representative at all of the America, you know what I mean, in terms of, certainly racial demographics. And of course, like the answer is always like, it's a pipeline problem, right? Well, we know that's not true, right? It is obviously many, many problems that lead to that. And I think unless we start having greater transparency at all places, right? I think that's where we need to go, because we can't hold people accountable until we know sort of where the issues are, you know what I mean? And I think that like writ large is one of the biggest actions that I think we can all take is transparency around all of these, pathways. So.
Absolutely. There are a couple of things that are converging here when it relates to talent and how we connect talent to opportunities and how talent thrives in the new workplace. One, I think one of you said that earlier, is that now talent has choices because we're moving more and more towards a remote workplace. I mean, I think it's being predicted that at least a third of jobs are going to stay remote after COVID-19 because companies now are figuring out finally that it's more efficient and effective, and actually productivity has just gone way up. And my organization is one of those. So that's one. Two, I think this new talent is a lot more, this generation is a lot more conscious about social justice issues than generations in the past. We've seen them for the last decade participate in big movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and a lot of other social justice movements, and they're going to demand that. So they're forcing that. So I think their expectations are different, is that they're looking for companies that have values that align with their values. That's one. And then two, we have to figure out that our systems break the bias measures that connect them. So how do we move forward now? You have this new generation of students. We have to educate them differently, and we have to help them connect with opportunities differently, so that in a more equitable way. But also we have to help them find the opportunities in the organizations that have similar values to them. And we challenge the workplace to transform. It's a lot of things that are happening all at once. And like I said earlier, COVID-19 is the ultimate accelerant, like things that we thought we wouldn't have to deal with for another 10 or 20 years are at our doorstep today. Where do we go from here?
So I'll just throw out, so I don't have the grand plan for what we have to do or where we're gonna have to go, but I do, the notion I've been thinking about lately is I have to think completely differently than I thought about doing this in any way before, right? That we have to be, so it brings me back to this notion of vulnerability. Like, how do we let them know? How do we let students know who we really are? How do we invite them into our organizations in ways where we are not physically together and we're more remote? I've got to figure that out, right? That we've got to start thinking about how we show up differently that really helps people understand who we are as organizations. And frankly, and I feel like there's an underlying piece to this, who we are as people, because that's who they're making an investment to come and work with. So it's not just about our corporate and social responsibility statements. It's really getting a chance to take a look at who we are. And that can be a scary place in a risk-averse environment where corporate organizations have these structures. So we have to really look at ourselves differently. And I think those are the conversations that, as I'm talking to peers, we are starting to have. because we know this, even just the notion of this fall is going to be really cluttered with a lot of virtual types of interest and engagement. And cutting through that noise is going to require us to be very different. It also opens for the entrepreneurial minds, I think, a real opportunity. If we can figure out how to date virtually, we can figure out how to do a better job of engaging in this way virtually. But I think there's an opportunity for innovation to really start to take hold to help us solve this problem.
And Adrienne, if I can just, riff on that. I mean, there are technologies, that have already been developed to do all of this stuff digitally, virtually, and that are anti-bias, so, and we're actually partnering with a number of organizations, that sort of cover the whole stack, whether it's, pipeline, decision-making, inclusion, to really showcase those. Because I think that's what we need, right? Because there's a lot of noise out there. There are a lot of things that will say, oh, we do this, we improve diversity. Again, no accountability. You have no clue whether any of that's actually working. And so we're basically partnering with organizations that have, concrete examples of this stuff really working, have very transparent and accountable processes so you can hold everyone accountable. And it does exist, so I think that now COVID is forcing everyone to say, okay, what are those tools? Where can we use them? Where can we put them in place? But I think that's a very concrete, actionable way that we can start to really change these processes. Because again, like just more of the same is not going to get us anywhere. So we really have to think differently about all this. So
I recognize that this might seem abstract, but I actually start and think about a company's culture and values that may have been set and defined 5, 10, 20 years ago. And once those values are set, you then build mechanisms to reinforce it, how you promote people, how you hire people, how you treat each other. And in many ways, at least for us being self-aware, I wanted to go back to our values as a company because those have scaled with our growth, that it's influenced who we brought on, and asked ourselves, are those still the right values here? And if not, how are we going to collectively, not just top down, but bottom up, challenge those values and then build the mechanisms to reinforce them? And to be honest, for a small tech company, like, we're able to do that. For Johns Hopkins, GDIT, that is probably a huge undertaking to go there. But I can't imagine how you can really get to a new place if you don't start there. You're just building off a foundation that's already broken. So,
amen.
Yeah, that seems abstract, but to me, I feel like that's where you have to start, and then the rest kind of follows.
Wonderful. This is great. We're almost at the end here, so I want to ask you to finish up with your vision for the future in one word, one image, or one sentence that describes what the future looks like. What do you think, Adrienne?
I'm going to say, just given this conversation, I'm going to go with piercing. This notion of being piercingly transparent, right? That we really got to dig in and look. Piercingly transparent. I'm going to go with that.
Beautiful.
So I'm going to go with a world where we realize everyone's inherent potential, not what we view people for who they are on the outside, whatever that outside box looks like. And I think that is going to get us. We always talk about this as a zero-sum game. I fundamentally disagree. I fundamentally believe that if everyone was seen for who they really are rather than what they look like on the outside, everything about the world would be infinitely more beautiful. And so that's what I'm going to stop with, is that.
I'll lead with, this is a real challenge to come up with just a few words, but the words that come to mind for me is collective responsibility. It's everyone's job. It's everyone's responsibility to be part of what we want to see. And anyone who's just sitting on the sidelines, frankly, is unacceptable.
I have an image in my mind of all of the protests that have been going on around the world for the last 2 weeks. It's so interesting what has been ignited. And Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream speech playing in the background. And I think that's what I feel the future holds for us, is that I believe we are the closest we have ever been to even glimpses of that speech becoming a reality, where we have a ton of work to do to get there. But that is the image I have. I have a dream speech playing out in my head over and over and over as I'm looking at all of the uprising that's happening around the world. Listen, I had an amazing time today. We have so much work to do. It was I appreciate your authenticity and just going there with me. There's a lot to uncover, and I hope everybody got to benefit a little bit from it today. I want to say that I'm really proud of my team at Johns Hopkins. They rise up to the occasion every single time. They've created the summer digital retreats series that's called Redesign Your Future. And they're thinking about all sorts of issues, from anti-racism to designing your life in a COVID-19 world. And they're setting up all of these community conversations and alumni talks and are including these vision chats in them. And we're opening them up to the public, not just to our students and alumni. So anybody can sign up. And speaking of signing up, and you can find all of this on our website, the next Vision Chats that's happening on June 25th will be with Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, the authors of Designing Your Life. We're going to talk about designing your COVID-19 life, but also we'll address all of these issues. So do register for those things. Thank you so much for being with me today, Adam, Adrienne, and Frida. This was a fantastic conversation. And remember, everyone, there is one certain vision for the future. It is the one that you create. Have a wonderful day, stay healthy, and be safe. Bye-bye, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.